and welcome to Liminal Light, a show that explores the languages of myth and star, earth, sky, tongue, and spirit through weekly astrological forecasts. I'm your host, Chris. Enjoy. Venus has reached her highest degree of exaltation at 27 degrees, marking this day as particularly strong in signatures of pleasure, beauty, art, love, aesthetic, attraction, and indulgence of all sorts. She enwraps Mercury, opening up much leeway to concentrate on these matters, as well as express them, which is lucky for Mercury, as he is in detriment in Pisces, so teaming up with a benefic planet in wonderful dignity helps him considerably. He is most artistic and poetic self today, feeling less dazed and confused. There's something spectacular about how the minstrel's lips part, and like a waterfall painting with rainbow scales, so many salmon and koi cascade down from a mist above into the canvas of the moment, which gently falls upon our shoulders, like a weightless robe, and contracts into a second skin, one that rings and hums in sonorous scale ascensions, shepherd's loop glissando. Caressing the liquid sky with his gliding body, streaks of polychrome chime and dissolve into the aether, where they color the air ambiently, as frenetic froth foams up from microscopic space, and in velvet articulates the fading memory of tenderest touch, the finesse and lucidity of tongue, the egg tempura pools, which grapefruit-sized pearls surface in and open to reveal incandescent dragonflies, whose buzzing symphony vibrates the matte medium to reveal impressions of unified remembrance of forgotten collective sensations, like the cry of joy released in concert crescendos, or the victorious release of captives. The tears that hover like opal orbs in symmetrical sinistros constellations, which perch perfectly in expanding nebula as particular planets drift apart perpetually into infinity. It is all this thread of coral called up from the watery depths, unseen and lit from below by massive hydra too large to ever be in any ocean. They are instead within and without, nowhere and everywhere, and only the eye afloat within the mind of the artist that dares to let go of it all can they be brought back from the brink of time before God blinks, and like a lash of ash dispersed by motion, unexpected do we find the true rarity of that which is pursued but can never be caught, and leads the fool, les mat, into unexpected abysses. The sun being on Neptune might put us all in Jack Smith's hyperbole photography studios in some sense. Whether you are on what side of the camera depends on your chart, and also how much Shalimar you're hiding beneath might reveal how many flaming creatures mobile around your hypothetical crib. I imagine the shutter will shock and film will fly from the canister if there's any frames left. As Chiron ends up in the far corner of Pisces, getting squeezed down the drain, the Venus-Mercury fusion, our core wounds are sucked into our costumes, become fantastical body armor and pieces of flair, end times amulets we wear as we become emissions out of a perfume atomizer. How fabulous. Last week I mentioned magic cork popping, and it still stands, despite the delusion factor is pretty much a given for the day. Let's let it all foam out for a few hours and check out what's on the other side once the bubbles subside. So those who stand upon slippery slopes already find something to grab hold of as the pink elephants parade past with their impossible entourage. You might remember this as the most fun you ever had, even though you are wincing in the photographs, or it might also be the reverse. You remember a night of confused tears and watery steps home through lost alleyways, but in the picture you're cheering and appear overjoyed. Peculiar indeed. For most, there is simply an opportunity to send old hang-ups and nagging preoccupations down the bubblegum gutter in a stream of jolly champagne piss. Or maybe that was last night. Oh well, why not have another go? On Monday, March 5th, it's welcome back to reality. The sun separates from Neptune to look into Achernar's sparkling light. This fixed star can bring an identification with states of crisis and inspire the clarity of vision to operate with swift and critical action in crucial moments. Something like this is normally likely to occur during most serious entheogenic experiences, or Shalimar-soaked photo shoots for that matter. Remember that the sun in Pisces' second phase is between worlds, and is easily detracted from mystical connections by being oversensitive to bad vibes. The identity impressively malleable to circumstances, but also likely to become distraught if forced into the mundane situations. There are a few different kinds of crisis coded into these configurations. Let's take your pick, I suppose. Meanwhile, throughout the day, Mercury applies to sheet, as does Venus throughout the night, which is also Venus night. What we adore gravitates to a love of intellect and logic challenges, as we break from conventional thought with new and innovative ideas concerning reason and aesthetic. Maybe this is when you pivot mid-runway to realize all the garments in your collection look better inside out, and you can't get the handlers backstage stripping the models fast enough for their second pass down the catwalk. Or in a more cerebral sense, you print Sudoku squares on tunics for ready to wear, so there is something distracting to engage in on a summer subway. The moon trine in Scorpio throughout, and Jupiter trine by sign suggests a lot of emotional interplay throughout the zodiac along these thematic lines, involving poisonous moods and feelings of delicious intensity, salivating over opportunistic coherence, quenching traumatic thirsts. Tuesday, March 6th, for those of us in Mercury perfections, or with prominent Mercuries in our nativities, Tuesday clears some air and blows the jelly out of our synaptic plumbing. The messenger then becomes more of a daredevil shot from a cannon as he emerges throughout the primordial pool into a darkened cave, and with a flash is promptly fired from the barrel of a gun into blazing light. Yes, Mercury is the first planet to make it into a new zodiacal cycle by ingress into Aries at 3 a.m. EST. Made all the more explosive by the trine by sign to Mars in Sagittarius. Out of the wet wash of intuitive emotion into opinionated, sharp, and strategic intelligence. Fast, independent thinking and clear to the point communication. This Mercury might be more argumentative and is certainly capable of carrying concealed fighting words in his vocabulary, although the most common word you might catch coming out of his mouth is simply, go. This creates an impulse to blurt it all out, so you may try to find your unique voice or personal communication and logic style. Try to fill your invocations or recitations with spirit and heat. Bring your fire up to your throat and use it to call and to command the universe might comply. Just keep it on an appropriate length leash. Know who you're talking to and don't speak so fast you trip on your tongue, as this could be quite a feisty communication period, and also hot and rash for travel, so keep St. Christopher in mind as to avoid succumbing to the vertigo of speeding, or simply impulsive vehicular maneuvers. Then, to show up Mercury's dashing entrance into zodiacally fresh territory, Venus ingresses Aries, exiting exaltation and entering detriment. Suddenly, the aesthetic of battle beckons us. We can see the beauty of anger, attraction to struggle. To express our individuality, we remember how to love a good fight or attempt physically challenging sex. Charge into hot and fast affairs, struck by scorching seduction. It would not be far off to even imagine Kali or Tara-type female forms. But on the other end of the spectrum, we end up with gaudy aesthetics, bright, bold colors, aggressive decoration styles, Fran Drescher leopard and red print, or to take it up a notch, Diana Vreeland. As this is a volatile time for Venus, as well as a Mercury preparing to retrograde, we shall have to step lightly, and as usual with all things overseen by Mars, find an outlet for the excess of energy. It's not that we should swallow our outbursts and sit fidgeting, but instead direct the action into appropriate channels and pre-prepared heat sinks. Set up some physical activities, technical and artistic projects, to put these flash fires into so you don't burn your life down or run it over with your car. We may awaken Wednesday with a receding recollection of being in the tunnel depths as the waning moon conjoins Jupiter in Scorpio at 4 a.m. This touch to the greater benefic and the sign of intensity, secrecy, and primal emotions is significant when you consider the greater array at this point. Venus and Mercury have entered a Mars-ruled sign. Mars is in a Jupiter-ruled sign, the moon in Mars' sign on top of Jupiter himself, Jupiter in Mars' water sign, and the sun in Jupiter's water sign. Plus Uranus is in Mars' sign, while Neptune and Chiron are in Jupiter's sign. This leaves only Saturn and Pluto in Saturn-ruled Capricorn, and the nodes in the Leo-Aquarius axis. We've got quite a big interplay between Martian and Jupiterian signatures. The coherence and understanding of struggles to express individuality, personal battles, the unearthing of suppressed or hidden intensities and traumas being dug up and brought to light, and how that moves movements forward, big agendas with a lot of raw energy behind them, and the arguments between individuals, fired up fantasy logic, everything blending and mingling and flowing away, but maybe also being blown out of fire hose, as well as kicking and screaming to be born from the purge expulsion waters come after birth. The ideal, the truth, fantasy, the grail, the fight for it, who is fighting for it, and why they fight one another in the process, both in the open and behind the scenes. There's maybe some Alexandrian expansion or some Crusades energy here. On the ground, we are clearly in more than a pickle, but if we survive these days, we are assured noteworthy mention on the ledgers of history, if they can ever disentangle it and describe what happened with any accuracy. But maybe that is what this is all about to a degree, an impassioned impulse to look beyond, to look how it all flows together into muck, and then sprint through the puddle to find a higher vantage and observe the scene from above, pull back and glimpse what is actually happening. As the blood mingles with the mud, we fight to receive the rare long view you are rarely awarded and hard to be a god. And in fact, we don't burst out of the digestive system that is breaking us down into chum. We will surely be digested and excreted by some beast we can't see, as we are in the darkness of the belly. A fairly Gnostic concept. But Gnosticism tends to whistle from the kettle and grab our attention when Mars and Jupiter interlace to such a degree. Everyone grab hold of something Saturnine as the hot air balloon is about to take off. But wait, just before it does, Jupiter turns retrograde at 7 p.m. EST and suddenly promotes perpetual growth less and holding current ground more. We look down at all the territory we've seized thoughtfully and begin trying to deeply understand what we've got so we don't lose it, so it doesn't all slip away. With the big balloon lashed securely down, we circle around it with bright torches and inspect every inch. If that's not enough light, we spark our great bonfires, although we must not get too carried away, or we might have a zeppelin on our hands, as the behemoth we're so excited to examine is filled with highly explosive stuff. We must tap into the wisdom and coherence part of Jupiter and not be led astray by the overly optimistic dimension that might let Mars puff us up too fast to send us careening to the conflagration. When Jupiter is retrograde, which he is for about 4 months out of every year, we concentrate less on acquiring more, increasing our holds and expanding our empires, and turn our attention to making good on the opportunities we have hanging around us. Use what's sitting in our lap, take advantage of what resources we currently have, secure the territories we already hold, and make efforts to understand our positions thoroughly. This will cause us to not be wasteful, to be more efficient, and to not end up feeling like things are slipping through our fingers. If you take more than you can use, you might lose what you're gaining and what you've already had. Embracing the Jupiter retrograde can reduce stress, as we can relax our advance to some degree and focus on holding down the fort, loading up the ships in our docks, and setting them for sail. The slowing down and turning around of our gas giant puts him on the 23rd degree of Scorpio from February 25th until March 21st. Here we find the fixed star Agena, the foot of the Centaur constellation opposite Ptolemy. This gives us some timely insight on how to approach this gear shift. Ajna's significations are about approaching the ordinary, everyday sacrifices and religious ordinances of ordinary life, so as to achieve semblances of success, wealth, fame, coherence, wisdom, opportunity through simple daily ritual. Sounds good to me. Take a look at your current magical or ritual practice and consider how you can optimize it, as it is to achieve more from it, to step deeper into initiation with what you've already formed, and see how that affects your circumstances outside the temple. On Friday, March 9th, following suit with this longer cycle downshift, we get a more regular and localized one, as Luna wanes to her last quarter phase by 6 a.m. Later that evening at 8 p.m., the moon conjoins Mars and then enters containment between the malefics. We may feel trapped between irritations and obligations that injure then starve our needs. Perhaps a forced energy downshift, like running out of steam or resources, physically or emotionally hitting a wall, just after over-revving our engines. What Jupiter and the moon are both talking may be handled with strictness by Mars and Saturn in tandem. It's best to just play along, as it ultimately sets us up for the pace of a longer period, and begins to get us good and grounded before Uranus enters Taurus later in May, and literally begins rumpling the Earth. 10 a.m. Saturday morning, the Sun progresses into the third decan of Pisces, shifting focus to the more dramatic and tragic nature of Pisces in the zodiacal death throes. Embraced for a roller coaster of emotions and visions, wills and identities, especially if you have prominent Pisces placements in your chart. Pisces people tend to overfeel Pisces season, as is their nature in general. Getting up so high you become weightless and lost, seeing everything as huge omens obscured by either positive or negative polarities, growing eager to blend vision and identity with the source or the essence of it all. The sensitivity to good or bad vibes is at its height here, which is perfect for soul-searching and visionary experiences. A great time to literally be on high, like on a mountaintop vista, chanting, fasting, and connecting in such a place of purely divine and sacred energy. Then the extra sensitivity will heighten the experience. But put yourself in the DMV or even in a conventional supermarket, and the darkness and bleakness of consumer culture gets blown way out of proportion, if that's even possible to do. Around 9 p.m., the moon conjoins Saturn, which is always some form of emotional incarceration. Emotions and needs forced into a rigid format, our soul put on rations. This clearly influences and augments the above. But again, a good mountaintop prayer would suit this slimming moon quite nicely. More ominous and tumultuous aspects brew in the background as Mercury will square Saturn, Mars will trine Uranus, and the Sun will sextile Pluto, all by Sunday morning. So making a concerted effort to put careful and pragmatic restrictions on emotions is not a bad plan before you are off to bed. Some solemn prayers over the candle as it's snuffed could add to exoskeletons, useful at sunrise, and if anything, this is a good reminder for how we might best operate in general. I'd like to welcome back to the show my co-host Bonnie.
Good afternoon, Chris. How are you today?
Good.
Good.
Yeah, and this is, normally we say that sitting next to each other, but we're actually in different places right now, so we really are wondering how each other's doing.
Well, by the time this is being forecast, we'll have Venus in her highest degree.
Yeah. Yep.
That's exciting.
Absolutely.
And we still won't be together.
Right. And
but we can wish each other well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we can send each other some Venus exaltation.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, of course, that's a perfect time to do some magic, try to catch that Venus in exaltation into some object. anything green. Green is Venus's color. Copper. Yeah, copper is Venus's metal. You can use malachite, carnelian, Venus herbs, like vervain, and what are some other Venus herbs?
What was it that you said that Lily called it?
Anything toothsome.
Yeah, toothsome.
Anything sweet and
toothsome herbs.
Yeah, anything sweet and toothsome. And, lavender is sometimes a Venus herb. Anything very like roses.
Yeah.
Not really rose hips, but rose flowers, and then and fruits, apples, peaches, figs, especially.
Strawberries.
So you can get all those things together. Wear green. Put on some makeup. Get in your like feminine pleasure mode, and concentrate all that energy. And if you know how to draw some like Venus characters, Venus correspondent images, you can draw those onto paper in green ink, or engrave them onto copper, and then you can hold that as your Venus talisman, and keep that in a place that you want Venus energy to be attracted to, and even for the sake of attraction. So you can put it somewhere where you want people to be attracted to that area. Like if you want people to be attracted to you, you can keep it on your person. You can put it on some example of your art. If you want people to see your art and look at it as being beautiful, like if you're having a gallery opening, you can leave it in a gallery, say behind a painting that you have hung, things like this.
It's definitely intriguing and fun.
Yeah.
So there's not much notice because it is today.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, totally. So, not much notice. So get right to it if you've already heard this. Otherwise,
you probably should just stop listening. You can always listen to it later.
Yeah, pause this, get to work.
Yeah.
Because once she reaches it's 27 degrees Pisces, and then after that was the highest degree of her exaltation. She's still in exaltation in Pisces, but she's technically in the last degrees of signs typically are more attributed to the malefics. They end things, like Mars divides things, it cuts things. It's Mars rules over severance, and then Saturn over boundaries. So they tend to the ends of signs tend to be more Saturnian and Martian in nature.
Yeah, I saw an article on National Geographic that was saying, it was explaining wonderful sky phenomenon that's going to be happening coming up, and it said on March 3rd Mercury courts Venus.
Yeah, nice.
And that you can catch a beautiful close conjunction between the two innermost planets in the solar system, Mercury and Venus, about a half an hour after local sunset.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's definitely a good sky gazing tip, that you can actually see this conjunction.
What's that?
Oh, it's just people don't always remember that you can see a lot of this astrology, you know?
Yeah, it's not just some, it's physically happening. Yeah. And that is why, like, whether or not you like it, you're being affected by it.
Right, yeah, it's right, you know, you can see it with your eyes, there it is.
Also in the article, it mentions that you'll be able to see the zodiacal lights March 5th through the 19th. And it says, keen sky watchers in the northern hemisphere can hunt down one of the most elusive astronomical phenomenon. And it goes on to say, the pyramid-shaped sky show is easily mistaken for the lights of a far-off city just over the horizon when seen from the dark countryside, but it's really caused by sunlight reflecting off cosmic dust suspended between the planets. The best time to catch this ghostly skylight is about an hour after sunset, looking towards the western horizon.
Wow, yeah, I definitely feel like I've seen that before. Where we live is...
And you're like, is that Waterville?
Right, totally. That's what I was going to say. For us, that's like... when we hit the hilltop and we look to the west, the town of Waterville is off in the distance, and you think, oh, Waterville's real. Something must be going on tonight. It's all lit up,
Yeah, there must be a massive 90s hip-hop act there.
Yeah,
because for some reason they're really big in Maine. I don't understand it.
Yeah, Belle Biv DeVoe or whatever.
Yeah, Onyx just played in Portland.
Yeah.
I was like, Onyx? Do they even have more than one song? Yeah, no, it's real.
Wow. I thought we were still jesting.
No, this is... No.
That's great.
I would not have been able to make that up.
Yeah, I know. I was like, wow, that was sharp, Onyx. Yeah. Unearthing that. I guess that's some Jupiter and Pisces just pulling up suppressed and hidden memories. They're listening to the show right now. They're fans, and there's like a tear.
And somebody tattoos it onto their face.
Right. Yeah. Totally. That's how that happens.
Oh my goodness. What now?
Well, we still have 5 planets in Pisces for the start of the week. The Sun, Mercury, Venus, Neptune, and Chiron. We have Venus in exaltation, and then right after that, as the week progresses, Venus and first Mercury, and then Venus enter Aries, and we get Venus in detriment. But for only a day before, we get Mercury in Aries, and he goes from detriment in Pisces to not being in detriment in Aries. And even though he's peregrine in Aries, and he doesn't have any dignity except for when he's in his bound, which is only a few degrees, it's better than him being in detriment. He ends up having we'll have a lot more clear, decisive thinking ability, kind of command over our logistical command, let's call it, and like we just have to watch out for blurting stuff out, and kind of there's fighting words are possible. We start to have be able to express ourselves again. It's the beginning of less of a fantastical time and more of like a direct, impulsive, kind of clear and action time, which makes sense as literally, especially where we are in Maine, the world is actually thawing, and there's more feet on the ground. Suddenly there's more movement. You can go to and fro, and things wake up, and that's part of, by the end of the month, by the 20th, the Sun enters Aries, and that's astrological New Year, and that's spring equinox. So Venus and Mercury always stay close to the Sun. They're Mercury only can go not even 30 degrees away from the Sun. So they're on either side. Sometimes the Sun enters Aries first, sometimes Mercury, sometimes Venus. So this time we get Venus in Aries, and as you're saying, you can see that conjunction in the sky. They're together for a few weeks here. They're very close for at least a week or two, and so that you'll get so it's like an artistic period. Venus and Mercury together always creates some kind of artistic expression, because you have Mercury, language, communication, logic, and then you have Venus, aesthetic, beauty, pleasure, love. And so it's the ability to see that, quantify that, understand that, organize that, and express that, so that'll be cool. We earlier today, before we were recording, we started talking about how that'll all play out in the fashion world, which has been interesting to watch, as we've been watching all the New York Fashion Week and London Fashion Week, etc., and then now Paris, and what was going on, and following along with the astrology. And sometimes it's pretty overt, and after it's all said and done, we can really see that Pisces season, everything mixed together, everything like a mishmash, there's no boundaries between anything. Everything's just all just flowing together into one mass, and and that also makes it diluted, because when you put everything together, there's no singular tastes anymore. You just have a blah, so we have this hideous, ugly kind of world. And can you recap what the press is saying about Paris Fashion Week?
Well, the most hilarious discussion about a review was for Fan. Like, my pronunciation is not beautiful, forgive me. But the new designer, it used to be Albert Arabez, and he was the darling. He did such a great job for so many years, and it brought Lanvin back into the spotlight, and now this poor gentleman had to take over. And so this is the review. This is his second show, but it says this is written by Luke Leach, and it says the most shocking thing about this collection was not how completely awful it was. Olivier Lapidous's debut last season, which I didn't get to, has since been spoken of in almost reverential tones as a low watermark of terribleness, down there with Kanye West's Paris debut and Lindsay Lohan's Ungaro Limit, which is pretty bad if you think about those two things, especially Lindsay Lohan's Ungaro Limit. I remember that. It was disaster. But it prompted a Vanessa Friedman piece in the New York Times, mercilessly headlined, "How to Wreck a Brand in 3 Years." It sounded amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's so great, like the official low water mark, and then you even get, the Pisces like water, and then and Pisces is the end, it's the end of the zodiacal process. So it is like everything flows together, and everything's let go. I mean, classically, and with Venus in Pisces, you have like, Venus in the artistic side of Pisces, because Pisces isn't like bad, Pisces is just, it's intuitive, everything's flowing together, everything's one, but you don't have any structure or form in Pisces. It's just ambience, and so it's a really cool transition to see these fashion weeks, and you're like, what is going on? You're like, it's like, we spoke about, was it, I forget who it was it like in the beginning of New York Fashion Week, about, it was Raf, right? Who?
Oh yeah, Raf Simon.
What show is that? Was it Calvin Klein?
Was it? Yeah, I think maybe. No, I can't remember. I feel like I should know this.
Well, anyway, it was like, it said like,
I'll check.
He's whipped out every influence from his whole career, and like influenced like everything in history, basically.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And so, that's like Pisces, like we're gonna throw it all in there. We're just gonna mix it all.
Just hope for the best. It's like I feel like some of it's just like you're not really inspired by one particular thing, so you just like you're just not inspired by one thing, so you just use every influence you could possibly think of and just hope for the best, because hope that something sticks, but nothing really sticks out. It just all is like, it's just like you're saying, it's like if you were to like just have this gorgeous meal including dessert and just throw it all into a Vitamix and then like serve it as your dinner. You're like, we made a lot of delicious stuff, like but then it just becomes,
and you don't know what it is anymore.
Everything loses its individuality, and it becomes, and what was once beautiful or potentially beautiful just becomes disturbing.
Right. Yeah. Disturbing.
Nauseating.
Yeah.
We were also talking about how I read another article on The Guardian about how crystals have become a magical style trend.
Yeah.
And how that's very Piscean.
Yeah, so Piscean. I mean, because like Pisces is it's all the intuitive. It's like, you get this with Scorpio and with Pisces, where the emotions are so, like with Scorpio, the emotions are so deep, they're down into like the spiritual depths, like almost like the bottom of the well, like the deep psychological, spiritual unconscious, but you get the emotions pushed to the spiritual in Pisces with like the intuitive, like fantastical, like kind of spiritual, kind of like release and ascension, like the mystical kind of like all is one, kind of vibe. And so anyway, you have that signature in Pisces big time of like everything you can think of that sounds like new agey, like just put in the Pisces pile, So you'll definitely get like yeah, like crystals on the runway and things like this, you know, and like how they were even putting like third eyes and things like that on the models, you know.
Oh yeah, Gucci.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then also there was this in French, in the Paris Fashion Week, this woman did a show where she made clothes that were sort of like fractalated, that had like designs like that. I can't find it now. And then they looked, you know, pretty normal, but oh, here it is. It's Andrialage. And then, you know, when you put colors on it, it completely looked different. And that reminded me of that crystal, but also it sort of is, it's hard to not think about John Galliano, how he did that with, you know, when it was different with what you saw on the runway versus when you took a photograph of it.
Yeah, totally.
That wasn't really like light dependent as much.
Yeah.
But this show was called Prism.
Right.
And it was the whole, like, the idea of the show is what you see depends on who you are and where you are, and everyone sees things differently. And so, you know, it's definitely worth taking a look at. Yeah, it's one of the more interesting things I had seen for Paris Fashion Week.
It's interesting because that's like, that starts to like show the separation too, you know, because there is like this crazy dynamic that I mentioned in the forecast of like Jupiter and Mars. Like you know, you have like you have the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Neptune, Chiron, all in Pisces in a Jupiter-ruled sign. Then you have Jupiter in Scorpio in a Mars-ruled sign. And then you have Mars in Sagittarius in a Jupiter-ruled sign. And then you have the Moon at this point, the week we're talking about, enters Scorpio and conjoins Jupiter towards like the middle of the week. And so you have everything except for Saturn and Pluto and the nodes, but as far as bodies, like Saturn and Pluto, in either a Jupiter or a Mars-ruled sign. You know, and you even have Mercury and Venus transitioning from a Jupiter-ruled sign to a Mars-ruled sign. So it's this like really crazy like inflating balloon, you know, like this like balloon that keeps inflating. It's like, and when you think of like a big hot air balloon, you're like, oh yeah, it's just a bunch of hot air. It's just a bunch of like hype, right? It's just a bunch of like, let's put this all out there. And it's very, and like the sun, you know, right at the beginning of the week, the sun conjoins Neptune, and that's like fantasy, but also delusion. And I think it's really interesting as far as how we're framing it right now with looking at fashion, to where like this, and there's like this debacle of the Paris Fashion Week where people are like, this is horrible, you know, and like that there's a lot of articles about like what's up with fashion. Like after all these weeks have gone through, people are just like, this is all terrible, you know. So it's like all this hot air, but then like the sun conjoins Neptune, and not only are you like, okay, here's the expose, everyone's completely tripping, but we've taken 1 million photos of it, you know, and the interesting thing is you get this anchor of Saturn and Capricorn being like, well, check it out, like we're gonna lash the balloon down to the ground, and we're all going to just look at it and see how absurd this all is, and all the division and all the hard reality that the balloon is pushing against, like the hierarchy of nature itself and the laws of even aesthetic, or the laws of taste, or the laws of like historical art decency, or anything, you know, like like whatever fine art represents, or whatever any kind of like any sort of rules of aesthetic, you know, represent. The balloon is just pushing against that, and you have like the two things going at once, you know, like eventually it'll pop, you know. And that's what's very interesting about that, is that, you know, Venus is going to enter Aries, Mercury is going to enter Aries, but with Venus in Aries you get really interesting dynamic of like the love of war and the love of a good fight and the love of like and you get really tacky aesthetics, because it's all about like really impulsive individual expression, just kind of like
you said Fran Drescher, which I thought was great.
And I don't know if she actually has that natally, but I looked into a list of people that have Venus in Aries natally. And of course, it's a huge list, but looking at mostly, I ignored a lot of the actors for the most part, and
because they all have stylists and they don't even have their own style anyway.
Or they're not like.
I'm just kidding.
There's a lot of things. Yeah, right. There's a lot of things like in their chart contributing, but I looked for like the Venusian signature, so I looked at like art and music, and so there's some really good examples like Charlotte Bronte, who wrote Wuthering Heights. Like, so you get this kind of like this dark kind of like aggressive evil Venus, like this like dark aggressive version of love and pleasure. You also get
Heathcliff.
Yeah, right, Heathcliff. You get Charles Baudelaire, also the same, like who wrote The Flowers of Evil, like Fleur de Mal, or the Flowers of Evil, I think is how it's commonly translated. You also
not to be confused with. Yeah, go on.
You also get Goya, which is like
so dark and incredible.
And Mikhail Bulgakov, and so that's another good example. Like, what is it like the Master and Marguerite? About the devil and this like.
I love that book.
Yeah, crazy, like love affair devil, like kind of Armageddon Russian story, Okay, and so you switch from art to. And then in the center here, we got Donatella Versace, really good example.
Oh my gosh, that is such a good example.
Lady Gaga, Billie Joe Armstrong from Green Day.
I don't even know who that is, but okay.
Well, just think, you can hear the singer of Green Day's voice, right?
Yeah, okay.
Henry Rollins.
Yeah.
Rihanna. And then like Johnny Cash,
cool.
which is different, but it's like this aggressive. There's an aggression to him. He's the man in black. He's kind of like the scary singer, of the time, right? But then you get just like kind of like these like big kind of voices, like, and like this kind of tacky music. Like you get Janet Jackson, Mariah Carey, Stevie Wonder, and this is an actor, but I put it in because he has an album and. If you know it, you know what I'm talking about. You get Eddie Murphy.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, just think about that little red leather suit.
Exactly.
That's so fabulous. Yeah, iconic.
Yeah. You get Taj Mahal, Bob Marley, which makes sense. He was like, it's basically war music, right? Queen Latifah. And so all this stuff seems to really make sense, You also get Lincoln and Einstein, but that's like why I didn't put why I concentrated on artists and musicians, because you can really see the art and music kind of disposition, the poise that they're taking. It's all kind of like Danny Elfman, who made the Forbidden Zone, that's a good example. So it's like you get this tackiness and this obviousness and this like but it doesn't mean that it's like Charles Baudelaire is nuanced in a way, but it's also like pretty obvious. You like look at the cover and it's like Fleur de Mal, and then there are just like these dark these dark kind of poems, or it's kind of interesting. So it's kind of like punk aesthetic itself. Like it's this like putting the individual expression really out there. It's like right in your face. It's spiky. It kind of says like up yours, like, and like we were talking about like John Waters movies or like The Cramps or something is very Venus and Pisces. Another example that I thought was amazing, it was Albert Fish, the serial killer.
Oh yeah. Whoa, weird.
So
with all the metal, is that the oh gosh.
He literally like he would stick like the long stem roses with the thorns and all up his urethra and then yank them out really fast for fun, that's so Venus and Aries. And then you get he had so much metal that he'd stuck in his groin area that when they tried to execute him finally, he fried the electric chair machine. Like he blew a fuse and they couldn't execute him that way. Or maybe they tried a bunch of times, but you also get Robert Moog, who invented the Moog synthesizer. which is like
the Mooger Booger.
Yeah, so it's like that's like a tacky sound, right? You know, like when you get like a
you think about like soundtracks and
and so it's really interesting. But one thing that was funny is that I was looking at I think it's called like Astro Seek, and you can just put in the aspects and get a list of celebrities. Some are like politicians, some are actors, etc. And you can have it sort them by order of popularity. So you're looking first at most well known. And I thought it was funny that Albert Fish came up before both Robert Moog and Henry Rollins.
Definitely.
Like, I don't think that's probably accurate, but in his day, he was notorious, you know.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, who's doing it? Who's doing the list?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know.
I can't think of Henry Rollins without thinking about that time that he had to babysit Tracy Pugh and Nick Cave.
Oh yeah, he hadn't lost track of them.
Yeah. I love that. I know it's not related, but it's just such a good story.
Yeah, that's really the best way to think of Henry Rollins. You know?
Yeah, it's like it's the cutest way.
Yeah. Again, we maybe have like a crying fan listening now. Meaning Henry Rollins is like checking out the show. You know?
Oh yeah, I'm sure. But
Onyx and Henry Rollins are just. I mean, this is so Venus and Aries, right? And Mercury and Aries were just like being cruel. You know?
It's I think it's all fair game. We're allowed to our opinion.
Right. Yeah, this is the media after all.
Yeah, exactly. I love that you're talking about setting up physical activities, technical and artistic projects to put these flash fires into, so you don't burn your life down or run it over with your car.
Yeah, and like that's like probably what people like Henry Rollins and Albert Einstein even, or Abraham Lincoln, or Queen Latifah, or Bob Marley, or Lady Gaga all had to do, right? Like that's like, you think about these people, they have this natally, and their art is very aggressive. Their creative output is kind of aggressive. Like, what would they be doing if they didn't have that project? And then you think about Albert Fish, and you're like, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, extreme example, but you know, like all these Mars signatures, all this Martian energy, this like go energy, like Mars wants to cut and burn, sever stuff, do stuff, attack stuff. You know, you might have to channel it into like attacking your creative project, you know, like it doesn't necessarily have to be creative, but something, something for you to do, something constructive to do.
Yeah. It makes me think of Ryan Fontaine continuing all those stripes that he's doing on that canvas.
Yeah, all the red stripes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a really interesting one right before Mercury goes into Aries. It's on the star Sheet, which is spelled like Scheat. And that star is it leads to like kind of innovation and independent thinking. It's in the constellation of Pegasus, and in ancient cultures it represented the intellect and knowing rather than unknowing, intuition, and was symbolized by so I was looking into that star, and you get this innovative thinking and new ideas, and it's not a major star that makes like a like Spica or one of like the 4 royal stars that always does something to a chart. But I looked it up who might have that natally, and I didn't get this huge list of well-known people like I did with Venus. Venus and Aries is a huge category, but sometimes you'll get that. Like with a couple weeks ago, we looked at Fomalhaut, and like tons of artists have a planet in Fomalhaut. But
Fomalhaut is.
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
And because that is one of the 4 royal stars, you'll get like these big reactions. But on Sheet, the first one that came up was Chuck Norris, but like that, I don't really know what to make of that. But I did find there wasn't a lot of actors or a lot of artists or anything, but I did find there are 2 good examples of fashion designers. One is Perry Ellis, and the other is Oleg Cassini.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and both like really created a new aesthetic in one way or another. One, Perry Ellis, for like, he changed it says he was a huge turning point because he introduced new patterns and proportions to a market which was dominated by more traditional men's clothing. So that was like a big turn.
Oh, I forgot he started off doing menswear.
Yeah, and he, like, I think, you know, he's partly responsible for making casual men's clothes and breaking people out of just wearing like 3-piece suits to work. You know, like, you know, still like shirts, ties, pants. It wasn't like a revolution, but men could kind of just like kick back a little bit more, you know. And so those were new ideas coming in, and that's very Pisces too. It loosened things up, you know. And then Oleg Cassini, of course, was the designer who's known for creating the Jackie O look, you know. But also was, you know, he really, that was a new look that really was highly influential and much admired. He was really inspired by.
Well, I mean, it helps to have a spokeswoman like Jackie O to be, you know, I mean, she's fabulous, you know, just the way she looked. So, and I mean, yeah, it was a nice, like, symbiotic relationship.
Yeah,
it wouldn't have worked as well if she didn't have such a great. But go on, I'm sorry. Oh,
just highlighting that it's like it was innovative and it was like a new look and it was a turning point of some sort, you know. So I thought those were really interesting because you don't always get multiple fashion designers with looking at like, well, who has that, you know. And so that's very particular to like Mercury activity.
Absolutely. I'd be interested to see Christian Dior's chart.
Yeah, I've never looked at that.
You know, because he created, of course, a new look as well. With that, that's what they called it, the Christian Dior new look, with that really like tiny waist and, you know, big skirt and a strong shoulder, like a sweet like tailored jacket. Looks so good.
Yeah, he could have another planet on there. It's something more to just continue to investigate to see if we find more stuff.
Yeah, I love astrological investigation.
We're running out of time, but I wanted to mention before we go back to this Venus exaltation thing that I was reminded a lot of, if anyone's familiar with like the Venus in Pisces and Venus on exaltation, that's just like as much Venus as you could get, as much as the Pisces Venus as you could get. Made me think of the story, the book, the Hypnerotomachia, Poliphili, which it has like a, you know, some people think there's different people have theories about who wrote it, but no one knows for sure. But it was like there's a lot of woodcuts in it, and it was printed before 1500, so it's like it's a printed book rather than a hand copied or hand drawn book before the age of printing was really incepted. And it translates to the strife of love in a dream, and I love that title. Very fantastical, and was a big piece of the early Renaissance and what became the Renaissance. Jocelyn Godwin is the one who translated it, and it's a major piece in the investigation she wrote that's called The Pagan Dream of the Renaissance. And it shows how it's really filled with these 5 allegories, and it ends with like the protagonist and the and his
spoiler alert.
Yeah, well, it's historical, and his object of desire meeting at the fountain of Venus, and that's where they like kind of come together after he like is separated from her, he's estranged from her the whole time, and so there's all these architectural structures and fantastical like arrays of things. It's especially like really specific architecture, and so it was very influential at the time, and very influential on Carl Jung, who thought it showed that he was correct about his theories about archetypes, but and then it has this like stress on like world building, the building of these like fantastic, this whole other reality. It's so Pisces, it's so fantasy, it's like early fantasy literature kind of, because it's not an actual myth. It's like what later is similar to the symbolist movement. It's like this just kind of myth you make up rather than like a specific riff from classical literature from antiquity. And it's really, I found that the Hans Christian Andersen original version of The Little Mermaid is really similar. Like I remember listening to the Myths and Legends podcast, and the host laid down that story and then was like, yeah, and where is he getting these ideas? They're super weird. They don't have any precedent really anywhere. What's the influence? And I remember thinking like, oh, it's totally the Hypnerotomachia Poliphili,
Yeah.
So that's something really interesting to check out if people want to dive into the Venus exaltation world before it ends, before they're putting on like never mind the bullocks,
Well, beautiful advice, and I would highly suggest taking advantage of it.
Yeah, that's probably what I'll be doing if I'm not doing something weird. Okay, well, that's it for the week. Thank you, Bon.
Thank you, Chrissy. It's nice talking with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll be back next week. Thank you for listening to Liminal Light. Our theme music was composed by the ever-talented Asa Irons. Today's background sound was by Birchings. I'm your host, Chrissy Buccieri Rapucci, and you can find me at atavisceral.com, atavisceral.com, where I post articles and forecasts, offer chart readings, talismanic concoctions, occult services, tarot, divination, and more. Thank you.